They laughed at my small business idea, ignored every effort, and then one morning, my side hustle went viral while they were still mocking me. I've always been the type of person who thinks in ideas. Not small, fleeting ideas either, but the ones that keep you awake at night, gnawing at the edges of your mind until you either make them real or drive yourself crazy trying. When I first came up with the concept for my small business, it felt like discovering a secret doorway to a part of the world I'd been too timid to explore. I couldn't stop imagining the possibilities, the ways in which people might actually benefit from it, the satisfaction of seeing something I had nurtured from nothing finally take shape. It was, in every sense of the word, my baby. But I quickly realized that not everyone was going to share my excitement. In fact, from the very first moment I pitched the idea to those closest to me, the reaction was exactly what I feared: laughter. Not the supportive kind, not the polite chuckle that makes you think they are humoring you. They laughed as if my idea were a joke, as if I had just confessed to plotting some childish fantasy. You really think people would buy that? My cousin snorted over coffee one afternoon, waving her hand dismissively. It's cute, sure, but realistic. Come on. Her words, and the laughter that accompanied them, stung more than I expected. What made it worse was that these weren't strangers. They were people whose opinions I valued, whose support I had assumed would be unwavering. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, it was the same pattern. Someone would mention my idea, someone else would smirk, and they'd collectively shrug as if my ambitions were somehow trivial. My friends weren't much better. Why don't you focus on something stable? They'd suggest, not even hiding the hint of pity in their voices. At first, I tried to laugh along with them, tried to convince myself it was fine to be underestimated. I'd nod, grin awkwardly, maybe even throw in a sarcastic comment to deflect the sting. But every time I went to sleep that night, my mind buzzed with the reality that I was alone in believing this could work. I wasn't just misunderstood, I was completely, utterly underestimated, and it burned. But the thing about an idea is that once it's alive in your head, you can't just turn it off because someone else refuses to see it. I began spending nights hunched over my laptop, sketching designs, researching suppliers, calculating costs down to the cent. My apartment started looking like a miniature headquarters. Sticky notes plastered the walls, spreadsheets lined my desk, and I even had a whiteboard in the corner filled with doodles, charts, and my wildly ambitious projections. I couldn't talk about it with anyone anymore. Every casual question from a friend about what I was up to was met with a vague smile or an excuse that didn't reveal anything. I had to keep going quietly because every time I mentioned progress, I risked another wave of condescension. Slowly, methodically, I started building the skeleton of my side hustle, coding the website late into the night, negotiating with small suppliers, learning marketing strategies from YouTube tutorials and free webinars. It was exhausting. And some nights I would sit back and stare at the ceiling, thinking maybe they were right, maybe I was being foolish. But giving up wasn't in my DNA, and neither was letting them have the satisfaction of seeing me fail quietly. I continued working, meticulously, obsessively, until the pieces started coming together. I remember the first time I actually saw the prototype of my product, an ordinary Tuesday evening that suddenly felt monumental. I held it in my hands and realized that this was real, that I had created something tangible, something that people could use, something that existed beyond the skeptical comments and laughter. I set up social media accounts, a basic online store, and began posting content, subtly at first, almost like testing the waters. I watched analytics, engagement, and slowly, imperceptibly, things began to move. One post would get a handful of likes, another might get a comment. And then, one morning, out of nowhere, my side hustle went viral. A blogger had shared it, a community forum picked it up, and within hours, my notifications were flooded with messages, orders, and inquiries. I sat frozen in my apartment, staring at the screen, barely breathing. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment they had all doubted would ever come. And the beauty of it, my favorite, sweetest part, was that no one knew yet. Not my friends, not my family, certainly not the ones who laughed at me the hardest. I watched as my idea, the one they had mocked, gained traction, built momentum, and started creating ripples I hadn't even anticipated. Emails from customers started coming in, praising the ingenuity, the quality, the care that went into every detail. People were genuinely excited. Social media shares, messages from strangers, features on small business blogs. It was overwhelming and intoxicating. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: vindication, yes, but also a quiet, simmering satisfaction at the thought of the looks on their faces when they finally realized I hadn't just been wasting my time. I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. I had proven something even more potent: I could succeed without it. But the story didn't stop there, because while the initial surge of attention was thrilling, I quickly learned that going viral isn't a straight path to happiness or success. It's messy, chaotic, and terrifying. Orders poured in faster than I could process them. Suppliers struggled to keep up with demand. Technical glitches on the website caused panic. And while I had imagined the triumph, I hadn't anticipated the exhaustion, the late nights spent troubleshooting, or the anxiety that came with every new customer inquiry. There were moments I wondered if I was in over my head. And yet, every time doubt crept in, I remembered those early days, the laughter, the disbelief, the condescending comments. I remembered the way they had dismissed me and my vision, and I channeled that energy into determination. I would not let their judgment define my path. I would not let their skepticism shape my story. Even as the orders increased and the notifications became a constant hum, I began to realize something else: the experience of building this business, of creating something from nothing, was changing me. I wasn't the same person who had first pitched the idea. I had become sharper, more confident, and far more self-reliant than I had ever imagined. Each challenge, each problem I solved, felt like a brick in a foundation I was building, not just for a business, but for myself. And with every passing day, the thought of them, the ones who had laughed, who had mocked, who had doubted, faded into something else: fuel. I didn't need to tell them yet. I didn't need to gloat. There would be time for that later. For now, I just worked, letting my idea grow, letting it thrive in ways they could never have foreseen. And I knew, deep down, that the moment of reckoning, the one where they finally understood what I had accomplished, was coming, slowly but inevitably, like a tide pulling in. The days that followed the viral surge were like nothing I had ever experienced before. My phone never stopped buzzing. Notifications poured in at all hours, and every time I checked my email, it felt like a mini avalanche of orders, messages, and inquiries was waiting for me. At first, I tried to manage it all alone, thinking I could handle the sheer volume of attention myself. But very quickly, reality set in. This wasn't just a hobby anymore. This was a business, a full-blown enterprise, with its own demands, pressures, and pitfalls. I remember one night, leaning over my laptop at 2 a.m., my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets for hours, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. And yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a thrill I couldn't deny. Every notification that popped up was proof that my idea was real, that it mattered, that people were seeing the value in what I had built, while the very same people who had mocked me were still blind to it. It wasn't just the volume of attention that surprised me, it was the quality. Customers weren't just buying the product, they were leaving messages about how it made their lives easier, how it solved a problem they hadn't even known they had until they saw what I had created. They were posting photos, tagging me, sharing their excitement with friends and communities. I had underestimated how contagious enthusiasm could be. I quickly realized that this wasn't just luck, it was validation, the kind that feels different from praise because it's unprompted, earned, and genuine. And with every new message, every tag, every comment, I felt my confidence grow, little by little, until it became something I hadn't felt in years: certainty. But the whirlwind didn't leave room for pure joy. Along with the excitement came chaos. Orders came in faster than I could process them. Suppliers struggled to meet deadlines. Packages were delayed. Customers asked questions I hadn't anticipated, and the sheer logistical nightmare of trying to maintain quality while fulfilling demand threatened to overwhelm me. One morning, I found myself on the verge of tears because a shipment had been lost in transit and a customer had emailed in frustration. It was the kind of pressure that feels suffocating and relentless, where the only thing keeping you upright is sheer determination and stubbornness. I remember staring at my reflection in the kitchen window late one night, and for a moment, I didn't even recognize the tired, sleep-deprived person staring back. This wasn't the cautious, reserved dreamer I had been. This was someone forging ahead in fire, testing every boundary I had ever known. And still, amidst the chaos, there was the constant thought of them. The doubters, the people who laughed at my ideas, who told me to give up, who dismissed every effort I had made. I kept imagining their reactions, the looks on their faces when they realized the success I had quietly achieved while they mocked me. At first, it was a small, almost private satisfaction. A quiet smile when I received a glowing review, a tiny, self-contained thrill when an order arrived from a city I had never even considered selling to. But as the weeks went by, That satisfaction grew into a subtle, simmering need to reveal the truth, to show them that the person they had underestimated, the one they had laughed at, had been quietly winning all along. I decided to start documenting everything. At first, it was simple photos of packages going out, screenshots of customer messages, milestones on my website. But then I realized that this documentation could serve another purpose. I could share it with the very people who had doubted me. I could show them what had been happening while they had been busy laughing, while they had refused to take me seriously. And so, cautiously at first, I began posting updates online. Nothing confrontational, nothing gloating, just the facts. A photo here, a screenshot there, a brief caption about how far the orders had reached. It was enough to make a subtle statement: this was real. I was real. My idea had always been worth believing in. Then came the turning point. One evening, I received a message from an influencer I had never interacted with before. They had stumbled upon my posts, my updates, my carefully documented journey, and they were impressed. Within hours, they shared my work with their thousands of followers. The result was instantaneous. Traffic to my website tripled, sales doubled overnight, and suddenly, what had been a growing side hustle exploded into something much larger than I had anticipated. I couldn't believe it. My apartment, which had once been a quiet, cluttered space for planning, became a command center. Orders stacked up, packages waited to be shipped, customer messages poured in from around the world. And all the while, I couldn't stop thinking about the people who had laughed at me, who had said it would never work. It was around this time that my first real encounter with one of my doubters occurred. I ran into my cousin at a family gathering. She looked at me, genuinely shocked, as if she had just walked into an alternate reality where the impossible had suddenly become fact. Her eyes flicked toward my laptop bag, probably guessing that I had been working on some little project she had dismissed. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the disbelief written all over her face. It was subtle, almost painfully restrained, but it was there. And I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost dizzying. I didn't gloat. I didn't announce the viral success or the surge in orders. I let it hang there unspoken, a quiet truth they could not ignore, a fact that no amount of laughter could erase. And yet, while the external validation was exhilarating, the real triumph was internal. I had built something from scratch, nurtured it through doubt and ridicule, and now it was flourishing on its own terms. I had learned to trust myself, to work quietly when others doubted me, and to persist even when the outcome seemed uncertain. The experience was reshaping me, teaching me that the people who laugh at your ideas are rarely the ones who determine your worth. Instead, success comes from perseverance, creativity, and a refusal to surrender your vision to someone else's skepticism. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed a subtle change in the way people treated me. Not just my cousin, but friends, family, even casual acquaintances. They started asking about my project, commenting on the success they had glimpsed online, and occasionally offering hesitant congratulations. Some were genuine, some still carried a trace of skepticism. But I no longer cared which was which. My journey had already proven itself to me, and to anyone else, the revelation would come in its own time. I felt a quiet, simmering anticipation for that moment when the full weight of their doubt would collide with the undeniable reality of my success. And I knew, deep down, that the most satisfying part was yet to come. The real turning point came unexpectedly, as these things often do. I had been quietly documenting every milestone, every order, every success, but until now it had been for myself. A private record of what I had accomplished, a silent tribute to the nights spent hunched over my laptop, solving problems no one else seemed to care about. But one afternoon, as I scrolled through my social media, an idea struck me. I could finally reveal what had been happening without saying a word to anyone directly. I could let the evidence speak for itself, a narrative crafted in screenshots, photos, and timelines. It wasn't about revenge in the spiteful sense, it was about truth. About showing that the laughter, the mockery, the subtle dismissals were irrelevant to the outcome. What mattered was the work I had done and the life I was building. I started carefully. First, a simple post showing the overnight surge in orders. I captioned it casually, almost neutrally, so it wouldn't seem like I was gloating. Last night's orders were overwhelming. Thank you to everyone supporting this small project. Nothing direct, nothing confrontational. But within minutes, the responses started rolling in: likes, shares, comments from strangers congratulating me, people asking where they could buy the product, praising the innovation, and sharing it with their own circles. The momentum built faster than I expected. Every notification was a small thrill, but also a reminder of how far I had come. This was no longer just a hobby, it was a legitimate enterprise, and everyone who had doubted me was now part of the audience, whether they realized it or not. Then came the subtle, personal hits. I noticed my cousin had shared the post, tagging a few family members in a way that suggested disbelief. I didn't need to comment or explain, the screenshots, the numbers, and the customer feedback told the story perfectly. They didn't say anything yet, but the shift in tone in their messages was palpable. What had once been mocking laughter was now a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and tentative admiration. And I savored it, not because I wanted to punish them, but because, finally, the truth was undeniable. My work, my perseverance, and my belief in myself had created something real, visible, and impossible to ignore. As the days went on, the story began to spread beyond my small circle. Blogs started picking up on the sudden success, small local news outlets ran features, and social media users continued to share my product with growing enthusiasm. It was surreal. At times, I had to pinch myself to remember that this was all happening because of an idea that had once been dismissed as ridiculous. Orders were coming in from cities I had never imagined, and inquiries from international customers began to trickle in. It was thrilling, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I had moved from a quiet, determined dreamer to the center of a whirlwind of recognition and attention. And through it all, the laughter and mockery from months prior felt like a distant echo, almost foreign. And yet, the pressure intensified as my side hustle became something larger than I could handle alone. I had to hire help, coordinate logistics, and make decisions I had never imagined I would be responsible for. Each step brought a new challenge, new stakes, and new fears. What if a shipment got lost? What if the website crashed during a surge in orders? What if I made a mistake and damaged the trust I had fought so hard to build? Nights became longer, stress compounded, and the excitement of success mingled with a constant undercurrent of anxiety. I couldn't rely on luck anymore. I had to be meticulous, strategic, and resilient, and I discovered that I could be. Amidst the chaos, I began to notice subtle changes in the way people around me interacted with me. Conversations with my family shifted. Comments that had once been dismissive became cautious, polite, almost hesitant. Some even tried to offer advice or support, though they had been the first to doubt me. I was aware of every shift, every glance, every question. And I realized that, despite my desire to keep my focus on the work itself, there was an undeniable satisfaction in watching these people reassess me without a single word from me. I didn't have to confront them. I didn't have to explain myself. The evidence was enough. The results spoke for themselves. But the most thrilling part was yet to come, because while I had been quietly building my success, I had begun planning the ultimate reveal, an orchestrated moment where the people who had laughed at me would see the full scope of what I had accomplished. It wasn't malicious. It was justice in its purest form, the satisfaction of seeing someone who underestimated you forced to confront the reality of your achievement. I started compiling data, screenshots, testimonials, and growth charts, crafting a visual narrative that was impossible to ignore. It was subtle, clever, and undeniable, a story told not with words aimed at them, but through the undeniable proof of my own hard work and success. As the day of the reveal approached, I felt a mix of anticipation, nervousness, and sheer excitement. I knew the moment would be dramatic because of the contrast, the laughter, the disbelief, the mockery from months ago, juxtaposed with the undeniable reality of my success. I imagined the pause in their conversation, the sudden quiet, the inability to immediately respond. I imagined the subtle shift in their expressions as the evidence sank in, and I realized that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just proving myself to myself. I was proving it to everyone who had ever doubted me. When the reveal finally happened, it was instantaneous. I posted the compiled story online, a detailed narrative of months of work, milestones, challenges, and the explosive growth of my side hustle. I tagged a few people casually, not to call them out, but simply to ensure they saw it. Within hours, the responses began flooding in. Comments from those who had once mocked me ranged from stunned silence to reluctant admiration, while others tried to downplay it, though their attempts were feeble against the undeniable evidence. And through it all, I felt a satisfaction so profound that words could never capture it. I hadn't just succeeded. I had done so while remaining true to myself, working quietly, and letting the work itself tell the story. The morning after I posted the compiled story, I woke up to a storm of notifications I could hardly comprehend. My phone was buzzing relentlessly, emails poured in, and social media messages stacked up like an unending tide. At first, I couldn't even process it all. I just sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, staring at the screen, and letting the chaos wash over me. The realization hit me slowly. This was it. This was the moment when the world, or at least the people who had doubted me, finally saw what I had built. The orders kept coming, messages of congratulations flooded in, and I began to notice subtle but unmistakable shifts in tone from those who had once laughed at my impossible idea. Within hours, my cousin, the one who had mocked me from the start, sent a message. I didn't respond immediately. I sat there staring at her words, reading them over and over. I had no idea. I never expected this. You really did it. There was a mix of astonishment and reluctant admiration, an emotion I had always found satisfying in its complexity. It wasn't just that I had succeeded, it was that she had been forced to confront the reality she had denied. And then came more messages from family, friends, and acquaintances. Some apologetic, some bewildered, all unmistakably acknowledging that what I had created was significant. Their disbelief was palpable, their admiration reluctant but genuine, and for the first time in months, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. As the day wore on, the story began to spread even further. Local news outlets picked it up, bloggers shared their own features, and social media amplified the reach of my post far beyond my expectations. The orders became almost unmanageable. I had to hire temporary help, coordinate logistics with suppliers, and streamline fulfillment, all while maintaining quality. It was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that comes with triumph. The exhaustion of proving yourself, of building something real, of achieving what others thought impossible. Each new notification was a reminder of the work I had poured into this project, a silent vindication of every night spent obsessively planning and problem-solving while others laughed. But the most rewarding part wasn't the attention, the orders, or even the financial success. It was the satisfaction of knowing I had persevered in the face of doubt. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and laughed at, but I had never allowed that to dictate my actions or limit my ambition. Instead, I quietly built something that spoke for itself, something so tangible, so undeniable, that the naysayers had no choice but to recognize its value. I felt an immense sense of pride, a deep and enduring satisfaction that no amount of external validation could replace. It was mine, and no one could take it away. By evening, the full scope of the revelation was apparent. Comments and messages from skeptics were pouring in. Some tried to downplay the success, offering faint praise with a hint of condescension, but most were clearly stunned. One friend, who had mocked me mercilessly, sent a simple, almost humbled message. "Okay, you were right. I see it now. I can't believe I doubted you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken. My work, my perseverance, and my vision had done what words could not. I had been validated not by arguments, not by explanations, but by the undeniable success of the project I had nurtured from an idea into reality. In the days that followed, my life changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. The business continued to grow, expanding to new markets and attracting attention from larger platforms. My social media presence grew organically, as did my reputation as someone who had quietly achieved something remarkable. And yet, I remained the same person at my core. The same dreamer who had once stayed up all night, obsessively planning, quietly working, refusing to give in to doubt or ridicule. The external recognition was gratifying, but the internal transformation, the growth, confidence, and self-assurance I had gained, was even more profound. And then came the most satisfying moment of all. At another family gathering, months after my reveal, I noticed the subtle shift in the room the moment I arrived. The conversation stopped briefly, eyes flicked toward me, and there was a quiet pause, just long enough to make me smile internally. My cousin, who had mocked me the hardest, avoided direct eye contact at first, but eventually, she looked up, and there was a small, almost reluctant smile. No words were needed. She had seen, she had understood, and in that moment, the laughter and dismissiveness of months past felt insignificant. I had proven something deeper than success. I had proven my own resilience, vision, and determination. In the quiet moments that evening, after the commotion had settled, I reflected on the journey. The sleepless nights, the overwhelming pressure, the constant doubt from those I had once trusted, they had all been part of the process. They had shaped me, sharpened me, and forced me to rely on my own judgment, my own work ethic, and my own creativity. I realized that the laughter of others, the mockery and disbelief, were never obstacles to success, they were merely tests of persistence. And I had passed, not by chance, not by luck, but by determination, innovation, and an unwavering belief in myself. By the end of that night, I felt a profound sense of closure and triumph. The side hustle, which had started as a small, almost whimsical idea, had become a thriving, growing enterprise. The doubters had been forced to reckon with reality, but more importantly, I had proven to myself that I was capable of far more than anyone had imagined, including me. And while the journey had been exhausting, terrifying, and full of unexpected challenges, it had also been exhilarating, rewarding, and transformative. I had done what others said was impossible, and in the process, I had discovered a deeper, stronger version of myself, the version who could not only dream but execute, persist, and succeed against all odds. That night, I shut my laptop, sat back in my chair, and let the quiet triumph wash over me. I thought of the people who had doubted me, the laughter that once stung, and I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with satisfaction. The story I had told, the business I had built, and the recognition I had earned were mine, and they were indisputable. I had taken mockery and turned it into motivation, disbelief into proof, and doubt into undeniable success. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. The greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, it's in proving yourself right.